Boosting Africa's digital transformation, a partnership between the African Union and the European Union is now in place to foster this transformation. But is Europe serious about helping Africa, and how much is politics involved? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hazem, Sika. The European Union is Africa's largest trading partner, according to UN data, but Africa's trade with China is growing fast. The EU and the African Union have established a new partnership to boost the continent's digital transformation. Beijing is already ahead on that. About 50% of Africa's 3G networks and 70% of its 4G networks are run by Chinese companies. But the African continent still offers many opportunities. So can Europeans remain Africa's partner of choice? Let's take a quick look at the new European-African 2030 joint vision that's just been announced. Well, the European Union aims to scale up investments, support innovation, and promote digital rights. Leaders from both continents have announced a $170 billion Africa-Europe investment package. And they want to increase Africans' use of the internet from 33% to at least 60% to help close the digital divide between the EU and Africa. The EU and African leaders met in Brussels last month. Trade, security, and the pandemic were on the agenda throughout the summit. 6 African countries were selected to establish their own mRNA vaccine production sites after African leaders complained of inequality in distribution. China has already spent billions on Africa through its Belt and Road Initiative and has become the continent's biggest lender. Let's bring in our guests now to talk more about this. From Pretoria, we are joined by Lorenzo Fioramonti. He is a professor of political economy at the University of Pretoria and a former Minister of Education and Research in Italy. Jibrin Ibrahim joins us from Abuja. He is a political scientist and senior fellow at the Center for Democracy and Development in Nigeria. And from Johannesburg, we're joined by David Monyae. He is the director of the University of Johannesburg Center for Africa-China Studies and an international relations and foreign policy expert. Good to have you all with us, gentlemen. David Monyae, if I could start with you. Is this something that could be good for Africa?
Oh, indeed. Africa requires massive injections of foreign investment, particularly in this digital space, given the fact that only 33% of Africa is wired to the internet. And for development to take place, I think there is more that is required. China is doing great. The United States is pouring investments. And EU is coming as a latecomer. However, what matters is exactly what will EU provide, tangibly leaving out all the rhetorics and the ideological approach to this. This is business, and EU has to take Africa as a serious partner.
Jibrin Ibrahim, what's your take on this? Can this partnership work?
I think the possibility of its working is very high for the simple reason that Europe has always had a dominant relationship with Africa without substantial competition. Today, they are being faced with substantial competition from China, and they know they have to improve their performance, they have to show they are serious, they have to change their ways, so that they can get a solid footprint on the ongoing developments in the continent. So I think the context of the time gives me confidence that Europe in particular will take this much more seriously this time, unlike has been the case in the past.
Lorenzo Fioramonti, what's in this for Europe?
Well, I think this relationship could be mutually rewarding. Nowadays, the data economy, the flow of data is dominated by 2 poles. North America and East Asia. And I think both Europe and Africa need to become as autonomous as possible in the generation of data and the use of data in the digital economy. So it could be mutually rewarding, but I agree with my colleagues. We need to see whether this time Europe is serious about taking Africa as a business partner rather than as a development aid target. This is real economy. It's the future of economic progress. And I think, it was long overdue.
Well, let's talk more about that point on the difference between, investment and development aid. What's your view on that, David Monyae? What's been the problem with Europe's relationship in the past that could be improved upon this time?
I think the problem, we'll start with the language. If you look at this agreement and the manner in which Europe is approaching the agreement, it's a question of trying to compete with China. There has been this reset and talking about a shared future. This is the language of Africa and China that they're trying to also use for legitimate sake. But I think we need to move from that. Previously, it has been a master and a colonial colonies in terms of relation where the hegemonic Europe will just set the terms of the relationship. I think this time around, if this is truly a reset, a number of questions have to be posed. To what extent will they cut the previously colonial tendencies into the digital field? That comes with a lot of challenges. Who's going to keep the data? Will European Union respect Africa's data sovereignty? At the moment, Europe is asserting its own data sovereignty, dealing with both China as well as North America, particularly United States. And equally, we should also see the need for EU to respect the African continent. The question of price, it's not a question of bringing data or new technologies on the African continent. How much will it be? Will it be accessible to the poor on the African continent? So all of the above need to be taken into consideration.
Well, you mentioned earlier what you called a colonial tendency. Could you expand a little bit on what you mean by that? Are you talking about a type of condescension?
Indeed, there's this tendency of a condescending language. Africa perceived as Tony Blair put it previously, that it is conscience in its eye, and looking at the continent as a helping hand, providing resources for poor Africa. But this is quite a different Africa we're talking about. It is a large population, 1.2 billion people, and the bulk of this population is young population, and therefore the continent remains the future market that has to be respected. And therefore, it's not just a question of wiring this continent using European software that the norms and value. This software is not neutral. It comes with certain norms, cultural values that comes along with it. And therefore, I think there is a need of a truly friendship in which both European and African culture operate hand in hand.
Jibrin, Ibrahim, what potential does this partnership have for job creation in Africa, particularly with its very large young population, as David Monyae was saying there?
I think the potential for job creation is extremely high. Just as my colleague just said, Africa has a young population. It is a very active population, and it's a population that's already familiar with digital methods and technologies, and is therefore available to play a bigger role in that field. Clearly for Africa, the potential of breaking the digital divide is extremely important for its future, and it could leapfrog many of the development development objectives it has set for itself over time and has not achieved. So it could be extremely important. Well, I think the conditions for it to be a major player in job creation has to be something that is reached on the basis of agreement between African governments and foreign development partners that want to play a role. I think specifically, the issue is to get out of the earlier development paradigm in which the West dictates what's good for Africa and then seek to impose it. If it's not accepted, they move on. I think for me, the onus is really on African governments and people to define what their key objectives are in this digital era and call on partners to join specifically on what they want them to come in to join. I think there are already great signs in Africa. The use of digital money in East Africa has been, for example, enormous and has changed a lot of the dynamics in that part of Africa. In West Africa, it's not been as high, although other digital technologies have shown considerable capacity to develop and produce jobs. I think startups in Nigeria over the past 2 years have had huge successes in generating support and investment revenues from abroad. And it's on these sorts of startups by Africans themselves that Europe has to now ride to be part of that investment climate that will create the potential for the multiplication of jobs in the digital economy.
Lorenzo Fioramonti, you think that's the reason why Europe hasn't been able to make inroads in Africa in the past, because of this, dictatorial attitude, if you like, as Jibrin was talking about there, of kind of preaching to them on good governance and democracy and so on, because that's what China doesn't do?
Well, I think that has been part of the problem, but I think it goes without saying that you can have different trade approaches, and I think I'm not against the idea of having trade with ethics, But the problem with Europe is that the ethic requirements have often been unilateral, one way, right? We expect African partners to behave in a certain way, never checking what the European companies were doing in Africa. So it was perceived as very hypocritical, especially after centuries and centuries of exploitation of the African continent and continuous exploitation of the African natural resources and so on and so forth. And I think this is now a new phase, and the digital economy is the economy of the present and the future. As we have mentioned, Africa has made incredible inroads into using digital infrastructure, digital tools to power different types of economic development. East Africa, digital currencies, where I'm sitting in South Africa, digital money is virtually, dominant. I mean, very, very few payments in South Africa are made in cash these days. So there's an incredible amount of opportunities for Africa to leapfrog to a new development stage through digital infrastructure. But the question is, if Europe is really, as we said, is really keen to do so on a bilateral and at the same time on an equal footing, or whether it's going to be trying to use its leverage to exploit African consumers. This is not what we want. What we need is to support African people to develop their own enterprises, to be able to use the internet and the digital connections to create new jobs, new economic opportunities everywhere. So, for instance, internet neutrality is really important. As we have already mentioned, the internet, if it's not neutral, it's controlled by certain parameters, by certain rules, and it can actually favor one side of the equation at the expense of the other side. And that what we need is also clarity around IP, intellectual property. Who's going to own the digital content? And what is going to happen to software? Again, Africa is, at this stage, a net importer of technology. African governments pay royalties to European and North American companies to use software, which is often imposed on African governments, African public institutions, African universities by these agreements. So we need to be able to use this partnership to develop African software, to strengthen the African technological platforms, to be able to do so in a very open and free way. So if this is what's going to happen happen. I think it's going to be a great opportunity for both players. Let's not forget the fact that even Europe is behind China and North America in terms of the data economy. So Europe has a lot to gain out of having a true and equal partnership with Africa, because it's going to be advantageous to European companies as well. So I think it's a great opportunity, but we need to sever our ties with the past.
David Monyae, what is it that Europe can offer that investors like China and Russia are not offering at the moment? What is it they can bring that's different?
They could bring. One thing for sure is that at the moment they haven't made any inroads. It really depends if they could come with cheaper technology. That Africa is not interested in the issue of competition as it stands. The United States is coming with its issue of ensuring that it's dominant and pushing China out of the market. EU is divided over the issue. Some European countries are neutral and trying to find their own space. And therefore, it really depends how they come in and what is it that they're going to offer. I think price is the key issue. And more importantly, to what extent in terms of the giant tech companies from Europe, will they behave? Are they continuing such with the behavior of Facebook and others who pay less tax on the African continent? Therefore, there's a question of tax. Are they going to contribute to the development of the African continent? The security, there's a huge security dimension to technology. To what extent are they going to assist in securing the continent as it moves to regional integration and ensure that it is done in line with the Africa Agenda 2063? So those are some of the key issues. To what extent are they bringing Africans to operate freely without really imposing their views, as was the case in the past?
Jibrin, Ibrahim, do you agree with that they could do more, that there is a potential here for Europe to offer a more beneficial partnership with Africa in the digital arena?
I think so. As you are aware, Europe has just worked out an agreement itself to reduce the dominance of American high-tech companies in their own economies. And it's a moment in which Europe is itself engaged in a struggle to build their own companies, their capacities, and the role they are going to play in the digital economy, just as Africa is also very much in that quest. This means in this context that's emerging and becoming important, Africa has a possibility of working in a collaborative manner with Europe so that they do some of those fights together. And in so doing, I think it's extremely important for Africa to know that it's not its role to join the fight of the Americans in trying to keep out China, because what we need is an arena in which there are multiple top actors, which creates opportunities for others to be players in that system itself. So I do think this is an important moment historically. You can't have a situation as you have in the contemporary world, where 4 or 5 American high-tech companies control the data flow of much of the world. And I think the ongoing struggle is an important one in opening up avenues for other players to come in. And I think in this context, Africa itself has to work with Europe as a partner to engage in this battle together in increasing the multiplicity of active and strong players in the digital economy.
Lorenzo, what's your take on that? I saw you nodding in agreement to some of that.
I agree a lot. I agree very much. You know, the fact that the digital economy is a great opportunity for diversification, but at present it's highly dominated by a few players. And again, what brings Europe into this for Africa? It brings a partner that has a lot of expertise, has good experience in terms of technology transfer. Again, what Africans need a lot is to be able to create an environment which makes businesses thrive, that is able to develop its own technologies and not be dependent on technologies built and developed elsewhere. So that means strengthening partnerships between universities and the industries and so on and so forth. And this is something that Europeans have a lot of experience in. And at the same time, and I think this is quite crucial, Europe can be a market for African technology. As I said earlier, most African banking systems are way more developed than the European banking systems when it comes to the digital economy. So opening up digital partnerships may very well give African banks the opportunities to expand in the European markets. African apps, African tools that are still quite common. I mean, previously we were referring to East Africa, the case of M-Pesa, digital money, already developed 20 years ago. It's become an extraordinary invention. Something like this is unheard of in Europe. So we could have a situation in which African technology developed by African people with African firms can actually expand into the European economy. This is very hard to do in China. Legal requirements, the Chinese protect their own, they don't care about free trade. And it's obviously very, very competitive in the US, while Europe is a much more fertile ground and still an open, uncharted territory for some of these creations. Again, so there is I think the added value of this partnership is the fact that the two players have a lot to gain vis-a-vis the others. The others are the incumbents. The others are the dominant players. These two guys, Europe and Africa, can join forces to become irrelevant.
David Monyae, we talked a lot up to now about what needs to happen and what hasn't happened before. But are there any examples you can point to of successful partnerships between countries in Africa and Europe or anywhere else outside of Africa that could provide a template for a model for what the best project is that could work out for everyone?
The biggest challenge we have is that there's no skills on the African continent. Most parts of the continent, the low skill human resource in this area. I think what could be done more successfully is to ensure that the EU works with the African Union and ensure that there is establishment of data centers at a regional level. Most African countries are small and unable to really build data centers. And therefore, I think if they could build these data centers at the regional level, it would be quite important and ensure that with these new technologies, the data resides on the African continent. It should not be where Europe is protecting its own data and at the same time, move on the African continent to mine African data and put it in European soil. So I think those are key issues. The other areas of cooperation would ensure that issues such as e-commerce, it's done in a fair way in terms of taxation. There are a lot of disagreements around those issues. And therefore, I think they could be find the best way that both European Union as well as the African continent benefits out of e-commerce. It's not one-sided. So those are key issues.
Okay.
A lot of challenges, more work needs to be done.
I'm going to give what's probably going to be the last word to you in the less than a minute that we have here. Jibrin, Ibrahim, how do you see all of this playing out then?
I think one issue of collaboration would be on the rather slow speed of internet in most of Africa. As we know, undersea cables connect Africa to the internet through Europe. And the African speeds tend to be extremely slow. And this is for a whole lot of complex reasons. But I think that's really one area of collaboration which would help in developing the infrastructure to really catch up the digital divide.
Well, good to talk to all three of you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks very much, Lorenzo, Fioramonti, Jibrin, Ibrahim, and David Monyae. Thanks very much for being on Inside Story. And thank you, as always, for watching. You can see the program again anytime. Just go to our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hazem, Sika, and the whole team here, bye for now.